Friends, we had the final development stream of Alpha 20 and they went through random world generation, showing off, well, the world building. They talked about the system with stamps, tiles, parts, PIs and all of that, and it was really fun to watch. We also got a bunch of updates during the stream and the Q&A, so this video is a short condensed form where I'm going to go through all the notes that I made. So as we head into those quickfire pieces, make sure to randomly press that thumbs up, like the video, subscribe, notify, and so on. Totally randomly, of course. So this stream featured Lathan and Eric and Robert. It's the last development stream before the next one was going to be real gameplay by Rick, Joel, and Lathan. A key thing that they tried to accomplish with the new random world is really to do it much better, make it more realistic, and they really said that the tiles are the hero of the new generation, adding districts with their own unique looks. An interesting part is that their roads are actually generally wider, and they did go through of actually why some of that is the case, because larger roads like sort of the highways that go across the maps, those are going to be wider, and the slightly thinner ones are going to be ones that connect to that, and so on. So if you see a small forest trail and you follow it, either you're going to hit a wilderness PI or you're going to hit a slightly bigger road or dirt road, and if you follow that one, again you're going to come to an even bigger road, and so on. And if you follow the big roads, you're going to end up at the cities. And Trader Rect has a really nice new cool POI compound. And they went through this system where basically stamps are these bigger areas which sort of like might be a mountain, it could be a canyon, it could be a bunch of lakes and stuff like that. Within the cities, for instance, you have the tiles. Tiles are sort of pre-made areas where you might fit in a few different POIs, but it also has the roads. It might have an overpass, it might have some storm drains and stuff like that, and even smaller, you have these parts which might be a hot dog stand or a news cart and stuff like that. They're sort of randomly spawn into these tiles of POIs. As to map size, they support 6, 8, and 10K maps officially, even though 12K might work, but they've really been focused on 6, 8, and 10. And while it seems that's going to be fairly flat, there will be features like, of course, the stamps with mountains, but also like ditches and everything. So it's not just going to be totally flat. There will, of course, be gradual hills and everything around. They have changed of how traders spawn. Now they will sort of be the gateway to cities. So they will always be where the big highways connect to the cities. The traders should be there. And coming back to the width of the streets or the roads that you're seeing around, that one really depends on the POI that is at the end, meaning that if you have a POI which basically has a roadway at the exit of the POI that is too wide, that's going to be the size of the road. If it's 5, it's going to be 5 size roads so that it connects nicely. Burnt forest has been removed, or rather it's been merged with wasteland, so sort of like this wasteland with burnt forest together. And the cool thing is about these parts, which are basically just small things, is that they're randomly generated and can be part of other POIs. They can be part of the tiles to sort of at runtime make it look differently. So you could, for instance, have an area on a POI or on the tile which basically says, hey, pick any of these X number of newspaper stands or hot dog stands or just trash bins or whatever, and at generation it'll basically just randomly pick one of those, so it will look different every single time that PI or tile is spawned. And they did show off the new random world generator in the game, and actually they generated a map on the fly as they were talking, which took right below 6 minutes for a 6K map. Of course, he was also streaming at the same time, so it's not a good example necessarily of how long it takes to generate. With the system they have created, you can actually create your own district, and you can drop that into the mods folder and it should just work. And there was a question of how you make custom POIs now, and actually you need to tag them for the district that it could actually appear into, and as long as it follows the appropriate sizes, it will just spawn. You don't really have to specify beyond that. Someone asked, can they stop making snow and desert touch? No, it actually does happen in Arizona, so they don't see any reason to change that. Now, on the subject of POI duplication, they have actually done a couple of different ways of doing that. They have tagging to avoid some of the duplication, and they've put in a check as well for distance. So you can check, is there a specific distance between the POIs or even within the same tile for duplication? So a lot of that actually should help with the duplication that was occurring in the past. Are there any plans to smooth the transition between the biomes? Not at the moment, no. So the question about, is the world mostly flat with the stamps? And they did highlight that there's no specific noise generator to making the height map differently. It is of course flat as a general rule, but then of course there will be going up and below that depending if you have hills and everything. So it depends on the generated map itself. And no, there are no specific like Alpha 15 hub cities that we had in the past. Was there any changes to how roads were generated? Yes, there was a lot of work to make sure they don't have such sharp curves and improving the pathfinding, so we should have no situation where there are vertical roads like in the past. Well, hopefully at least. And a really good question that keeps coming up is Naviskane getting updated, the Naviskane map. And they have added that they have worked on it, but random gen has really been the focus. So even though there's been some updates in cleaning up Naviskane, there's going to have to be more of that in Alpha 21. This update is really a random world generated update. And the skill trees are not getting updated. And the question was, will we be able to make our own custom height maps for the maps themselves? And yes, you can do that. Someone asked if you can just generate a map that is basically one large city and use all the POIs. And while you can do that, it will affect frame rate. They did try to make a sort of a 6K map with one city, and once it got up to a quarter of that, you started to run into problems. There was definitely a performance impact because of all the POIs. Now the RWG, the random world generation, is multi-threaded, but of course some parts are still single-threaded. And there are wasteland tiles. Now, tiles in Alpha 20 do cover all the different biomes, all the districts, but they will continually make more tiles. And of course, modders can make their own tiles that gets included in the random world generation. A great question about randomly generating a world. Can you do that in a server just like you do in a client? And you can't really specifically from the command line input or when you're starting a server, because it's going to be using the default values. If you want to change that, you would have to go into the RWG mixer.xml and change those defaults and then generate it. So while placement of POIs within these different tiles is made based on the width and the length, what about height? And the answer is that no, that's not taken into account. If the size, meaning width and the length of it, is fitting, that's good enough. What about more tiles? Are they going to be added in Alpha 20 point releases, or are they going to have to wait until Alpha 21? And it's a good question. They mentioned that it really depends on what's decided. Probably they'll have to be more in Alpha 21. They could be done in point releases, but it means that people who are not regenerating maps won't really be able to take advantage of it. So at least the community modders will be doing it. Whether the fun pimps themselves will, that's really up in the air. What about Grand Canyons? Yes, there is one crack, which is one stamp that can do that, but yes, they can definitely make more. A highlight was that it needs to have more destruction, and this is something that's come back in a bunch of the comments to my videos as well, that a lot of them look really pristine in a way. And the fun pimp said yes, they have been increasing and will be making more destructions in the tiles and the POIs, sort of the apocalyptic look of it, but that's going to come step by step. And yes, they most likely will be including their pre-gen maps just like they have in the past. They've always been doing that because it basically saves people from having to generate if they just want to get into the game. It's just a matter of getting a few good seeds and including a good map. Now, cities are by themselves flat. They do not have any natural elevation. Now, you can make a tile that has no elevation within it, but it has to go back to the basic height level. And the reason for that is because otherwise roads and other tiles would not fit smoothly in because they would be on different height levels. So yes, you can have a mountain within a tile, but at the borders, the end, it has to go back to the general height. Someone asked whether you'll be able to spawn things within a tile other than, say, an industrial district. And yes, you could set up a town type as a military district and then spawn only military POIs within that, which actually would be pretty cool. And yes, they've definitely added remnant POIs to be used as survivor bases. Another great question was, do they have plans to add even more options to the random world generators, such as how much of the individual biomes are going to be generated? And they said quite possibly. They are there in the RWG mixer, but they could actually add that in the actual editor, or generator rather, so that it's easy to access. And so they're definitely going to be working on and polishing up and see what other options they can put in. What about custom tile sizes for custom random maps? And no, they have to fit in the correct tile sizes that have been provided. What about a shared spawn point for co-op? They have actually talked about it, but they haven't finalized it, but there's definitely interest in doing that. And for those of you who wonder, there's actually, I believe, a spawning or something, spawning.xml in the world file itself, the created world, that actually specifies where players will be able to spawn, and it normally comes with a bunch of different randomly assigned ones, but you can actually edit that yourself and remove the ones you don't want to have. What about tunnels that go through, say, a mountain? And no, it's really processor intensive to count and put POIs along the path and everything, so no, it's been avoiding doing that because it hits performance. What about waterfront living, waterfront POIs? And they haven't really made any work for the waterfront stuff like you might see in Naviskane at some of the lakes. Everyone will like it, and it would be cool if they make it happen, but there's a lot of variables of the shoreline, the shaping, making sure you have the correct spots that the POIs can be placed into, and so on. What about the road generation? Is it all flat, or is there a height variation? And yes, there's plenty of variation. They will go up hills and mountains and so on. What about bus stops as small POIs? Well, you actually can make bus stops as the parts, for instance, like the food trucks and so on, that can be spawned in randomly. And Robert has been looking actually of making caves in some ways. There's no specific plans that he can commit on, but he's been thinking about how to do that in some way. Now, the wilderness POIs that are in there are not on tiles. They're just generated as part of the wilderness. It's only the cities that are having the tile system. What about train lines between the cities? They have talked about it. It is something that is possible. And, there's all these different cool ideas, but just not enough time to execute on all of them. And a wilderness POI is basically one that is just tagged as wilderness, which means it can spawn in the wilderness. What about trader quantity? There should be one trader per city, and no, you cannot increase that. You have no control over it beyond that. What about dedicated servers and random gen? Yes, there should be some increase in performance there. What about randomly generating worlds and the amount of water? You can actually control that by the lake values, and the more you have, well, the more you get. And coming back to the POI duplication, so depending on the settings of the POIs and the tiles, there's actually checking within a district, within the tiles, to make sure that you don't have duplication, but you can also do it for a certain range, etc. Will pregen create any wilderness caves? And no, that's just POI caves. So if you have a POI that is a cave, yes, otherwise no. Are zombies spawning in the tiles? Yes. Will there be more tiles added to Wasteland? Right now, all biomes should have some kind of tiles. For instance, specific towns. So there definitely are Wasteland tiles. Will RWG ever be able to randomize loot in POIs? Well, the part system could, but it's not really random gen. That's really more part of how the POIs are being generated, because you could have a loot room that is a part, and different of these parts could then randomly spawn, where some would have better loot, more chests and stuff like that, and some would have less. What about the actual map borders? Well, right now their plan is to have water or tall mountains with sort of the radiation zone starting somewhere in the middle of them. How close will players spawn on average to cities and traders? And this is something that should be within 500 to 1,000 meters. It should be in a safe biome and, of course, close to a trader. Will Naviskane specific POIs like the stadium, I guess some of the beach, the lake POIs be added in random worlds? And probably not, unless they find a way to do that, because these are custom ones that are really made across a certain landmark feature there. And what about that zombie squirrel? Is it coming to Alpha 20? No, but Alpha 21, Rick seems to confirm that yes, it's coming, but of course he might be trolling. Rick also highlighted that the squirrel can go in a mod with that giant bee that is coming. Is it possible to tag a POI so that it can spawn only once in a random world? And yes, it can be. Whew, and that was it for 2 hours of streaming, about 2 hours and 15 minutes. They did have some hiccups with no game audio during the stream. Sadly, that was the case, but at least we got to see the visual. But what do you think? What's new and cool that you picked up? Let me know in the comment section, and thanks for that random like. See you next time.
Special thanks to the great patrons supporting the channel. If you would like to join the vetted community and support these videos, do follow the Patreon link.